And so now, at what point of how long ago did you transition to mid-air haptics? And maybe since we are moving now into like mid-air haptics, because it's, I would say it's somewhat very different from kind of, in a way it's represented, right, to a user, and more likely in terms of sensations. I honestly never worked with mid-air haptics, but I have a kind of feeling that in terms of sensations, it also has certain like advantages and probably also limitations in comparison to other types of feedback. So yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about mid-air haptics, what it is, like, you know, limitations and advantages in comparison to other types of feedback. And my follow-up question will be also about like any behavioral or psychophysical aspects when it comes to mid-air haptics in comparison to other types of feedback.
Yeah, so the first time that I tried mid-air haptics was now 7 years ago, more or less, when I transitioned to mid-air haptics. And when I tried it, is this technology that you don't see, but through these ultrasound speakers, you can actually make a sensation that you can feel on your hands without entering in contact with anything. So for me, the fascinating stuff was that which links to the advantages is that you don't need any to be tethered, any to wear any device to hold anything in your hand. So the technology is potentially transparent, right? Because you could implement it in your chair, in your car, in a museum. You just put the hands onto the device and it's working. And it's also silent because we are using ultrasounds. But if you want, you could make some sound coming out from the device. So you could have at the same time haptics and sound, and this opens up also opportunities for multisensory interactions. And to top that up, if you want, you could also make levitating stuff, and all of three together. So for example, so we did this ultra button, which is a button in midair that you don't see, but you can touch. So it is also hygienic, especially if you think about the recent pandemic. But in general, I'm more on the germaphobe side of things. So I don't like to touch, you know, touch things in public and so on. So there is also this advantage of midair haptics. So so this had a huge potential, especially for me at the beginning as a PhD student. I wanted to explore the different kind of frequencies, modulations that you could use to make the haptics real, let's say.
Yeah, and if you talk about like perceptual aspects of mid-air haptics, are they different from the actual like touch perception or versus like vibrotactile touch perception, and how they're different, if they are?
Yeah, so during the different studies, I realized that there are similarities and differences. So, for example, we don't have a well-defined contactor. Usually, when you have a haptics device, you might have something in contact with your skin, which is very precise. In our case, we have a focal point. We call focal point is area of maximum pressure that actually indents your skin and makes the percept. So you have this, you can imagine like in a 2D, a circle. At the center, you have something that is more high pressure and then some sort of shading on the boundaries, for example. So at this point, you start thinking when is, and also the focal point is quite a complex phenomena. So you have this acoustic pressure, but also acoustic streaming. So a bit of wind, if you want. So when is that you start to feeling the vibration? When is that you start feeling the air? When is that you feel 2 points instead of one? Can you use perceptual illusions, for example, or how do temporal and spatial summation effect on the skin works? So there are all of these questions. Some of them we already answered. Like, I don't know if I have to talk about psychophysical aspects, are exactly these differences in the focal point. So it's,
you can mention that. Why not? That would be interesting. Like, for example, like you mentioned about illusions, right? Are they the same? Can we achieve the same illusions, tactile illusions that we are usually having, like on real touch, for instance? I don't know, with rabbit illusion or anything else.
Yeah, indeed. So just last week, we published this paper where I studied this apparent tactile motion. So at this point, we have just 2 points, static, and activating them in a timely fashion, you can feel a sensation of moving, going from one point to another one. So we know that apparent tactile motion can be successfully stimulated with mid-air haptics. But as you said, there are also
Nice.
rapid illusion funneling that we could exploit, for example. Or maybe going a bit backwards in time, we discovered that we can also stimulate the hairy skin. So now, instead of doing just discriminative touch, we might move towards social or affective touch. So because we can exploit this phenomenon acoustic streaming, so you can feel it on the airs as well. So yeah.
Can you give an example, like of use cases for this social touch? That would be interesting, I think, to like talk from more of a practical like point of view, like everyday life. Like,
can
you give some examples?
Well, in my studies, I just studied the phenomenon by itself. But if I have to say, maybe it could be occasions where people are at distance because, I don't know, they are in the hospital. I still remember like this patient that some nurse put these gloves filled with warm water just to give this sensation of touch that many of us missed at that time. So if you have our technology, for example, you could put it near the arm of a person and then be in contact with them and kind of provide a caress, for example. Or if you are meditating, you could do an application that is sending you affective vibrations on the skin so that you can relax yourself and increase your well-being. If I have
can you do that with mid-air haptics? Can you affect like emotional state or like achieve certain emotional response from humans?
Yeah, we are at the beginning. So we just studied that you can stimulate the airy skin. So stimulating the airy skin, it means you will stimulate all of these afferent tactile cues that you can actually use for affective touch. How to modulate them maybe is not yet clear, so we need to do more studies. Maybe we need also to change a bit of contextual variables, because of course, if you know that it's your partner sending the stimulation, you might feel it in a more pleasant way or not. If it is a robot or a stranger, of course you will behave differently. But potentially, yes, we could influence your influence. Probably we can give some affective sensations, also modulating the speed of the focal point on your speed. We know that these fibers that decodes the affective touch might move at 3 centimeters per second. I mean, they are more sensitive at 3 centimeters per second. So if you modulate the speed in a right way, you might influence them. From our results, participants were feeling pleasant sensations. So in a way, it was always pleasant. So we need maybe to find a way to make it unpleasant, just to have this dichotomy. But for now, it was pleasant. But we never studied something more, long-term to see if there are effects on well-being and so on.
I see. And so the parameters you work with are like similar to, let's say, vibrotactile feedback, like you see sort of frequency, like amplitude, duration, and vacation on the body, right? Or like rhythmic aspects, same stuff.
We have the frequency, intensity, location on the body, as you said, and the modulation type, because you could, for example, just play with amplitude modulation. So you go forward from 0 to maximum intensity on and off, and you can feel a sensation of vibration. You have spatiotemporal modulation, so it's a point that it's moving quickly in a circle, and then you are stimulating another kind of sensation, but more or less they are vibrations that we are working with.
So the basics for these designs you basically take from the original kind of knowledge, right, of how to design haptics, right? From, I don't know, what are your like foundational studies that you use?
Yeah, sometimes
to design your experiments.
Yeah, you take studies from the literature depending on what you want to achieve. In the last paper, I was saying we use apparent tactile motion, so you have all of these references to the first illusion that was studied, or affective touch. You have big papers on the kind of affective touch that the parameters that you have to use, what intensity, what speed, as I was saying. So you sometimes draw from the literature and you expand that, or you try to replicate the results with our technology, because you don't know if it's still working. Many times it does. So yeah, we might have different parameters, but in the end there are similarities.
Got it. So